All right, welcome back to eXp Realty Minnesota. I'm Justin Campbell. Today we're jumping in to writing a good offer with Jordan. Jordan, a fellow eXp agent and also a member of the advisory group, a team that I recently joined. Jordan was one of the early connections that I had there, just liked his approach. Anyways, welcome aboard, Jordan. Let's talk a little bit about writing a good offer.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. A couple things to just jump right in here is, kind of find the context of what the situation of the house is to write a good offer.
Let's do like 400. Have you been to Lakeville or Apple Valley lately? What's a South Metro city you've been in recently?
Burnsville.
Burnsville. How much? How much was the house? 350.
It was listed at 350. Yep.
You listed at 350. I want to write an offer on that property. How would you proceed?
So in this market, I'm going to try to figure out how many offers are currently on the property.
Okay.
And try to. It just was just listed.
Nice.
We're in a market right now that, if a house is just listed, you got to go see it that day.
Okay. So you're there that day.
Yeah, and we offered 383.
Okay.
And we had no inspection, and we had an appraisal gap of $10,000. So the big three things that I point out is that we gotta look at financing, your contingencies such as your inspection and finance contingencies, and then appraisal gaps. Those are the three big things that I try to work with clients to get their offer to stand out.
Nice. Let's say I'm in Richfield right now. Let's say it's like a 320. It's been on the market for 3 or 4 days. How would you typically approach writing an offer? I'm like, hey, Jordan, I want to write a good offer on this property. Let's go. What would you recommend for? Well, we got a couple different things to talk about, really. There's a lot. We talked a little bit about doing your budget, and briefly just kind of, you need to make sure you know what your budget is, because you can't come in on strong on a property if it's out of your price range. And I think sellers can sort of sniff that out. They know that you are out of your price point, right? So they're going to be less inclined to look at your offer. So obviously start with a budget. Jordan talked a little bit about coming within like 10%. Is that what you're saying, of having a projected budget?
Yeah, when I tell people or talk to people about budgeting, have them apply within a lender, figure out what their max pre-approval is. So if their max pre-approval is 400, I usually tell people try to go about 90% of what that pre-approval is. So 10% is $40,000 on a $400,000 pre-approval. So if like 360, 350, 360 is probably where you're going to want to try to look at for properties. So not only can we show the seller that we're pre-approved up to 400, but we can also, go over the list price in a market where, there's going to be 7-8 offers on a house, and you're going to have to try to compete for a price on that property.
I wrote one that got accepted that I included the letter that was, I think it was 60,000 over what we were offering was what the buyer was qualified for. And so it was something, I don't always leave the dollar amount in there depending on how it's reflective, right? But in this case, I talked about it with the buyer. I was like, this is a good strategy. Let's show him that you are super qualified for this property, and you're at this lower income, debt to income ratio. So you've talked with the lender, you know what your price ranges are. What do you say about earnest money? How important do you think earnest money is in writing a good offer?
It's probably one of the minor things that I mentioned to clients. It's definitely something that you want to, put your foot down on with the seller and let them know you are serious to buy it. I think the kind of the overall recommendation a lot of realtors do is the 1% rule. So if you're offering, $400,000 home, you're going to offer $4,000 earnest money. Could you offer a lot more? Yeah, sure. Everything's negotiable in real estate. You could put $10,000 down. I think it kind of comes.
You could do the whole amount if you wanted to. Yeah. So there's
Yeah,
really,
you could do a cash offer at $400,000 and put $400,000 earnest money down.
that would be a very, very strong offer.
Yeah, hey, if I don't buy it, at least you get the money you would have got for your house, right? So, I think it comes to at least do 1% to make a
Okay.
strong offer. You could go a little bit more to definitely make it stronger. But I think there's a little bit, it kind of weans after a certain dollar amount. So, some people go super crazy and put $30,000 down. I don't think there's really going to be really that much of a difference between putting $30,000 down and $10,000 down.
Yeah.
But a $10,000 earnest money is going to have a more of an impact than like a $4,000.
And I like to clarify this part for people, because I think if you're coming from renting, not everybody's coming from renting, but if you're coming from renting, you think earnest money you don't get that back, right? You're like, I've lost the earnest money. And so it's important for people to understand that to have a contract be effective, there has to be an exchange of goods and services, right? Like if you watch any good crime show, they need the person to give the person the money of some sort, a down payment on the action. And that makes it, now you have a legitimate contract per se. So by giving them that earnest money, you've executed on that contract with them, but you get it back under conditions. And so some of those conditions would be, maybe you just don't show up to closing. You're probably going to lose your earnest money at that point. I think everything in between there, we have a lot of disclosure opportunities to make that decision, right? So I'd say 1% is good, 2%, maybe 5,000. If it's maybe you got a $200,000 house, maybe go a little bit higher. Okay, so earnest money. What type of mortgage products? This is really the next question we would find out, would be what percentage down, what percentage cash. How do you want to write a good offer? How do you write that portion in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the magic number is 20%.
Okay.
In terms of mortgage, I think there's the different styles or the different types of financing are conventional, VA, FHA, USDA, and then if you count cash as a mortgage, but that's a type of financing. Cash is always king. They always sellers are always going to be looking at cash as a more of a sure thing than someone who is financing. And if you are financing, you definitely want to go try to go conventional if you can. Conventional offers are just generally a lot smoother. They have less restrictions and less hoops to jump through for both buyer and seller.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If I can, obviously it's not my decision. I had somebody ask recently, what about a 3.5% down? So it would be, say, 3.5% down, the balance of that financed. Do those offers win? And I said, if you write the rest of the offer good and you're not competing with a bunch of people, you're probably going to be fine in most cases. But if you're in a competition, you could have negative implications just because you have less down. Ultimately, they're saying you have a lower overall investment, but it still works. And so as a strategy, like if you showed that house in Burnsville and it was on there for 2 weeks, right? 3.5% down, that'd be a good offer, you think?
So in terms of, putting money down, 20% is usually the magic number. It's better to put less down on the paper and put more later. So something that you could do to make your offer stronger if you're 3% down is to have an appraisal gap. And I know we'll get into that later, but showing that you have money for an appraisal gap with 3% down, is showing that you have some funds to close this deal and put your seriousness to the seller. So I think it's really no difference between a 3, 5, and 10% down, if you're coming in with an appraisal gap. 20%, 25% down tends to have a little bit more of an impact just because it does show that you have funds and a lot of finance. Well, financing sometimes gives you the option to actually waive the appraisal when you're putting that much down. And sellers would know that, and that's just gonna, it just really puts a more security sense into the seller's sense that they're dealing with someone with funds.
Okay, so we got earnest money. We've covered the financing portion of it. Offer price. how do you typically, when I show somebody a property, what I'm telling them right now, I'm doing a kind of a niche area. And so I'm telling customers, I can get you at or near list price. That's what I'm basically, all my services that I'm offering is at or near. And some of them are going under, right? And so for some people understanding that we could get, how do you, somebody says, hey, I want to put in a low ball offer. I want to offer $3,000 less or $7,000 less than list price. Would you consider that writing a good offer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm a math guy, so I usually kind of calculate what's going to constitute a good offer, what constitute a low ball offer. My general rule of thumb is that if you have a property that's been sitting and you want to offer, I generally tell somewhere between 5% to 7% off the list price to kind of determine what your low ball offer is too. There's little other factors in there too that you want to look at too. Is the buyer asking for closing costs? Some financing will, you could go 3 to 4% off on closing costs on the actual purchase price too. So if you're a buyer that needs cash to close on a home, it might be a little bit harder to have to get money off the list price.
I see. Okay, what about inspection? I know we talked about this in the office before, like early on in the interaction, the first thing somebody says, should I get an inspection? I say you should always get an inspection. Maybe I'm being a meme, just kind of being a dork there. But I think you should get some level of inspection, regardless of your comfort level or not. Even if you just want that contingency there for a few days. But sometimes you're not going to win in that case, and so you have to make a decision. So do you think including an inspection, it would be writing a good offer?
Yeah, so I think everybody's kind of fell into this like linear motion in real estate where you have to get your offer accepted, and then get it inspected. Do I think you should get your inspection? Yeah, of course. It's always good to have information on the house that you're buying. I think what some people don't realize is that you can generally do an inspection right at the beginning of your offer getting accepted in the first week or two, but you could also do it after the closing too, right? So you have kind of different options on inspection. Generally, the inspection period is going to be where your negotiating happens. So in terms of this topic, and in writing a good offer, do you want to have an inspection period just to have like educational purposes, or do you want to have it to have like negotiating power? So when you're writing a good offer, it might be something where, hey, I want to have an inspection, but I just want to let you know that I won't be negotiating, during that period, because I love your house. That's more informational purposes than it would be negotiating.
Well, then you could still elect to do an inspection than just to have it be non contingent on the inspection. Yeah. So I always put that in there, that it's yes inspection. And then if they don't want to, and then I put non-contingent. I put 10 days on there. So if you want to, you can go in as long as you don't have, okay, so we're past that point, right? So then we've got the earnest money. We've got everything. Am I missing something here, Jordan? What else do I need to include in my offer to get this thing to write a good offer?
Yeah. So the last thing that I always mention is an appraisal gap. So if you don't know what an appraisal is where when your financing comes in and the bank's going to make sure that the amount that you're bidding on a house is going to be worth that amount to finance. So this is also can be used as a negotiation too if the appraisal comes back lower, right?
I prefer it for my buyer. I hope it comes 5K under, right? Like I'm open to it, and then I can potentially turn that into a win. Maybe not. But it really depends on both parties. So,
yeah, like a lot of times the first thing that I'm doing is I'm writing, if the appraisal comes in lower than the purchase price, we want the ability to renegotiate or, back out of the deal, right? So of course, sellers aren't going to want that, right? So when you're in a competing home, you kind of want to get in front of that negotiating part and tell them what is going to happen if the appraisal does indeed come back lower. So generally what I'm telling people is try to do what's called an appraisal gap, where if the appraisal does come in lower, you're going to contribute funds to meet the purchase price of what you're trying to buy. Try to at least put $5,000 down. It's not really hitting a whole lot. with 5,000, but
Mhm.
I think 10,000 really makes an impact.
It's a good
Um,
wedge. It's a good wedge, and it's insulating. It's a good bet for the seller to take too. So really, it's
mhm.
kind of like you could win. It is a gamble, right? It's sort of could be more cash at closing type of situation. And I think I I guess if it's at list price, I obviously don't include appraisal gap there because I'm just going to do at list price. What about in the special features section? You know, you've got that blank slate. They give you 10 lines or whatever Jordan loves the most. What do you put in your what do you put in the other category? Do you ever use that?
Yeah, so like minor stuff is like you gotta try to do a little bit of research on kind of what the seller's situation is.
Mm-hmm.
I know closing is like a big thing, for sellers, right? If they're buying a house and they need to close at a certain day for them to purchase their house, or one thing that you can do too is you can do a rent back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of those lately, but some things that if you run into a seller that is purchasing a home, you could close early and then do a rent back. That way, the sellers know that they have their cash in hand, and then when they go to purchase, they have a very smooth transaction on their side.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this makes you a landlord for temporary.
It
A couple,
increases. There's some risk. There's some risk there. When I talk
yeah,
about rent backs, I'm always like, are you financially capable of having this go south? And if it does, what happens? You lose your dream home. You can't evict this person. So I do try to recommend it for people who can definitely afford the rent back. So I think it's pretty good summary overall. In the other section, my thing that I try to do, we talked about it earlier, was just really the speed and trying to get everybody up to speed as quickly as possible. And so if you're already in your decision loop and you know what you like, you've looked at enough properties, you have enough idea what the market has to offer, right? You have your earnest money, you got your mortgage, you may or may not use your appraisal gap depending on if you're going over. In the other comments, the thing that I put in there is if I can get to that property on the first day, I will add in there that this offer expires the next day. And I will, especially on Fridays, if it's a brand new listing on coming soon been coming soon for 3 years, goes live on Friday. There's a circus, the media is there, there's a hot dog truck down the street, like, what do you do? Like, you can write a good offer, right? But there's a really good chance you're not going to win. And so, in that case, it's more like a Hail Mary, right? Where that seller is ready to go. And so if you can get to that property, get all that information, how much you want to offer, do you want to do inspection, how much is your earnest money, refundable, non-refundable, inspection, how do we want to navigate this? Get that offer together in 15 minutes, 25 minutes, get it in the seller's hand. And I add in there, good till tomorrow, because I want that conversation to happen between the listing agent and the seller. And I also don't want this listing agent to be able to use my offer against me tomorrow, right? Because tomorrow somebody calls and like, hey, Jordan, do you have an offer on that property? If I sent it to you, you don't, right? So now you're like, actually, I don't have an offer. I have one that expired. So I don't know how often that works or if it's a really effective strategy. For me, it works here and there. It's intermittent. It depends on the situation. But I think it's also important to talk with your agent. Hopefully you pick either Jordan or myself. You're working with either one of us. It doesn't matter to me, but that you have a really good strategy going into it. Any last thoughts you have on writing a good offer before we get back to work?
yeah. I think real estate's always a risk. So if you ever plan to take those risks, just make sure you're comfortable with them. And I think talking to your real estate agent on combating some things that could come up, in case it does go south, that it'll help you through to the finish line. It just goes a long ways on trying to win a home in this market.
Awesome. Well, I'll throw a link in here. So if you want to hook up with either one of us, let me know. Thanks for your time today, Jordan. And hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Justin.
Have a
Have a
good
nice
rest
day.
of your day.